All right, good morning. My name is Samantha Mirabal. We're doing our Design Shop Talk today. So this is where you can ask any questions that you might have, and I'll see if I can answer them. And if not, I'll try to find the answer and get back to you. So hopefully, my volume seems to be a little loud. Hopefully the sound is good. Let me check to make sure both platforms are actually live. Let me see. There is YouTube. We are live on both YouTube and Facebook. So if you do have questions while we're live, type them in on the chat, and I will do my best to get them answered for you. All right. Both platforms look to be live, so I'm going to assume volume is good and get going. All right. So how do I add an outline to a letter or to a shape? Cool. Let's do it. So, a letter. I have an S. I like a chunkier letter, so let's change that to block 2, just because, and I don't know, make it a little bigger. How about that? All right, so if I want to add an outline to this thing, what do? Well, here's another thought. Do you guys know why it's doing this? So if I go into properties and under top stitching, right here, this is why it has fill in these areas, because it says use fill for stitch lines greater than whatever number you have here. So that's telling me that the stitch from here to here is bigger than 80 points. So it does that to protect you from having super long stitches which are prone to snagging, right? So here's a fun little thing. You can use common auto split, which kind of makes it look more intentional and puts kind of that little divot on there. I really like the common auto split. You can also use auto split, which does it down the whole thing. I like this one. It's cool. Anyway, so that wasn't your question, but there you go. So to add an outline, how can we do that? We have a few different options. So you can, of course, go into properties if this is a letter. This doesn't work for shapes, but if it's a letter, you can go into the properties here, and under auto borders, you can enable auto borders. You can tell it how wide you want it. I don't know, 18, whatever you want. And it can put a little border on that way. So that's one way. I'm going to undo that. You can select your shape, hold your shift key down, and with the shift key down, that's to add. Control is to replace. So if I do shift and click on this single line center guy here, that again adds a border. Okay, and it's done as a single line. So then I can go in and change the properties of that, reorder it and all that stuff. So let's say you want to do this where the border says first, and then it says your letter. Oops. So I'm going to drag that up, give it a different color. That's cool. And maybe that border, I want it to stick out a little bit more. So maybe I make that a 30-point border, and I can go into the properties, and under single line, you can even adjust it rather than making it bigger. You can make it overlap or stick out more one way or the other. So rather than just doing center, you can tell it which way to bias the stitches. So that's another option. So that adds it to a letter. So you get 2 different ways. You can add a border using auto borders, or you can do it as a single line, and then you've got, I like the control of doing it as a single line, personal preference. Okay, what about shapes? So let's zoom out some and draw a shape. Oh, I don't want to draw a box. Let's try that again. So what shape? I don't know. Let's draw a messed up house. All right, I have no holes. Give it a start, a stop, and a stitch direction. Actually, let's put a hole in it so you can see that too. All right, so if I select the shape to add the hole, since I bypassed that, I can come over here, add a triangle window, because you know all windows are triangles. Anyway, so I've got the goofy looking house. So to add a border to this, again, I'm going to hold my shift key down. That is the same, what I'm doing here is the same thing as using this feature right here, change element from one type to another. So for instance, select the shape, I can click on that. I can say single line center. That is a constant width column, right? So that's what most borders typically are. All right, so I can say single line center. If I say add, that is going to add a border around it. If I say replace, it's going to get rid of my fill that's on the screen and just put an outline up there. So the fill's gone and it's just going to be a little triangle in a weird looking house. Okay, so shift is the same thing as clicking on add, and control is the same thing as clicking on replace. Okay, so if I say add, it adds the borders, right? So I'm going to delete those two, select this, and do the same thing. I'm going to hold shift on my keyboard, and then right here I'm going to click on that single line center. Same thing. See, so it adds borders on it. And the same way that you did with, or that I did with the single line on the letter, I can go into the properties here, and under single line, I can go change the width to be wider. Let's make this so you guys can actually see it all. There we go. So I can make it wider. I can tell it to left justify, which makes it line to line with the fill. Not a good look. I can do custom and tell it which way to bias onto my shape. So why would you want to bias it onto your shape more or less? It's, in my opinion, it's a good practice to have some amount of overlap on your borders to your shape, because when you're doing that fill, it's going to shrink in some. And there's nothing worse than sewing something and having, I'm going to exaggerate this grossly. Oh, that's not a good look. All right, let me get rid of the hole. So it actually, there's nothing worse than you sew something and you've got a gap between your border and your shape because of pull compensation, right? So you want some amount of overlap on it so that when the embroidery shrinks a little, you still have it nice and overlapped and looking clean. Good morning, Fatima in Texas. Welcome. Thanks for joining. So that adds, oh, and Colorado, Sherry. Thanks. Welcome. All right. Yeah. And again, if you have comments or questions while we're live or follow-ups, just type them in on the chat. When you see me looking off to the side, that's what I'm looking at, my second monitor where I've got kind of a chat window up. All right. So what else do we have? So we talked about shapes and adding borders, letters and adding borders. The letter thing works also if you've got multiple letters, right? So if I've got multiple letters, I can do shift and click and it will add borders on all of those. Test sew mode, isn't that just this? It's just showing you what it's going to do. So John is asking, what does test sewed mode do? It's going to show you what the sew out's going to look like. Hopefully that was the question. I didn't miss the mark. All right. How to use split line, alternate, blur, and tile. So I can tell you what they're supposed to do. I will also tell you it's currently not working correctly in the released version. It's a documented bug that will be fixed in an upcoming release. So I can tell you what it's supposed to do. I've used it in the past, but it doesn't currently work. So, you know. All right, so if I've got a shape and I add a split line to it. Okay. So all that a split line does is when you're sewing, every time it crosses that line, it's going to do a needle penetration. All right. So if I select my shape and then let's try that again. Select my shape, then click on my outline. Now that split line is now selected. If I go into properties, I'll get properties for that split line. There is tiled. Tiled will then tile whatever shape. So if you want to create your own custom kind of stamps and different patterns, this is one way you can do that. Okay. So there's that. You can also, so what blur outline, like I said, it's not currently working, but let me explain what it's supposed to do. So blur outline of 4, what that did, or what it will go back to doing, is rather than having all those needle penetrations right on this line, it'll have one over here by 4 points, one over there by 4 points. So every other line, it's kind of going back and forth to blur the outline so that it's not a really hard line that you can see fabric through. It's more covered up by stitches. It'll still look like a distinctive feature in your shape, but it won't have that tendency to show the fabric through. Alternate split is one line will be on there. So once as it's going across your split line, it'll put a stitch. The next one won't do it. This one will have a stitch there. The next one won't. So it's it's alternating the splits. So that's what they're supposed to do. Those two features right there are currently, they have a disconnect. So, but that's what they do. So that is a documented thing that will be updated. Okay. All right, what else do we have? I want to do a multiple line verse. It requires 2 hoopings. I've got to divide from left to right for each hooping, yet to keep each line indented in the original place. What's the simplest way to do this in the property window? Oh, it's John's birthday. Happy birthday. Well, all right. Simplest way, what I'm going to show you is, I consider it simple, but most wouldn't consider it simple. But keep in mind, I do split hoopings all the time, so it's kind of something that I don't even think about. So that's why it's extremely easy for me right now. So I got a bunch of text. So I saw this question right before we went live, so I did not get a chance to pick stuff to make a example. So we're doing it live. Lots of text on. Let's go. Lines. How do we split it up? I don't know. I'm just trying to write a lot of text. All right. So let's first off make it where we'd have to split it. So let's say it's 20 inches wide, which this is, of course, with this font, it's going to make it a gazillion stitches. So this was probably not my best idea. But yeah, so we're at 120,000 stitches. But, and I'm going to quick, just so I don't have to look at it, I'm going to make it flat fill, because the random fill will make me nuts. Oh, excuse me. Okay. All right, so this is 15 inches tall, so technically that will fit in a hoop. So it's just a 20-inch wide that we have to worry about. So what I do, right or wrong, is I decide what hoop I'm going to do this in first, and I set that up. Oh, where's my big hoop? I gotta go get it. The hoop I like doing this in is this one. Although that one's not going to fit the height, but that's the hoop I like using for these big things. So I'm going to go set that hoop, and I'm going to make it fit the height just because that's what I want to do. All right, so here's where you've got to kind of puzzle it out. You've got to decide what where I'm going to split it. So I think we're going to sew lots of multiple how do we it up in one hoop. And then text lines on split, those are going to be in a second hooping. All right, so that's first and foremost. So decide what you're going to split, and that's where I'm going to do it. So I'm just going to draw a vector just to illustrate. I'm going to sew this in one hoop, that in the next. All right, so that's kind of step one, is think about how you're going to do it. The next is to decide how you're going to align it, right? So I like using features on the design itself as my alignment points for the second hooping. So maybe I would use this corner of the I and that corner of the L. Or you can digitize in some shapes that are going to get covered up later, right? So it's really what do you want to use? So I'm going to say those 2 points, or maybe I don't know, pick something that's in line. So those are in line, so I'm going to use those. All right, so you decide. And it's really, I just need it to fit inside the next hooping. All right, so I know if I select all of this stuff and move it over, notice those actually that L will fit, and the wider the split, the better. So let's do it that way. All right, so that's going to be, I'm going to use those corners, that corner and that corner for alignment. Okay, so that's kind of the next thing, is think about how you're going to align it with laser alignment. All right, so now you just got to create your files, right? So I usually do a copy and paste and take the first one. I leave one with all the text there and then delete out what I don't want. So text on, lines. This is going to mess it all up. So operations, convert to wireframe. So once it's all happy, I can do that. So now I just delete these. Lines, split. There we go. So there's my first one. Don't convert to wireframe until you're happy with it. Again, I'm going to copy and paste this guy. Operations, convert to wireframe. I'm going to hide the green one so I don't delete all those. And now delete all this stuff. Nope, I want that. I did not get that. There we go. Okay. So we've got this guy and these texts. All right. So now I've got the two segments. Now I just have to create the two files, right? That I'm going to actually sew, because this is a combined file. That's going to do me no good. So I'm going to copy this, go into a new file, paste, center, make sure it still fits in that hoop, or if I got to move it around. Nope. So I just hoop and sew. All right. My next file. Where's my combined one? There we go. So I'm going to grab that, all this red stuff and that vector line. That vector line that I put there, actually before I do that, sorry, you guys get to watch me in my whole crazy process here. I'm going to go and make sure this line is where I want it. At the corner of that shape. All right, so now now that that's there, I can select that line and all the red stuff, copy it, go to a new file and paste it. This line is where we have to set up the origin. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and oh, I see what happened. There we go. All right, so I'm going to move all the stuff down here. Under design, delete that thing. Delete this, we don't need it. All right, the center of this has to be centered on here, and it has to be in line with this red line right here. That's the center of the hoop. That's how when you do laser left, laser right, or sorry, laser left, laser bullseye, it's going to rotate and align your design and place it where you want. So I'm going to select all of this, and you got to keep that in line with there, because remember, that's what we set up reference to the other. So I'm just grouping it all so I don't accidentally mess it up, right? So I'm eyeballing it. Eyeballing it is not a recipe for success, by the way, but it's what I'm doing at the moment. So I'm getting it relatively close to where I think it would be, and then I'm going to ungroup it and look at whether I actually have this centered or not. And wow, I did it pretty darn close. So I'm going to move it over just a little bit, and then again check it. There we go. So that's now, that line is centered on this guy, and it's on the red line here. So now I can save this. Now you'll notice it does not fit in my hoop currently. That's okay, right? Because, oops, wrong hoop. You know, that doesn't fit, but that's okay, because when I go to hoop this, I am going to hoop it with how I had it over on this guy here. Not that guy. Where's my combined one? I should have named all these. I'm going to hoop it where, you know, The S is kind of cut off with my hoop. The L and the L that I'm using for alignment are in where I can see their edges, so close to this edge of the hoop. And, you know, the rest of it's kind of centered. That way I can go to this point on that L, laser left, that point on that L, laser left, laser bullseye. It'll rotate it, and then when it sews, it's going to sew up in this quadrant to that hoop. Okay, so that's what I would do. Does that help at all? Hopefully it does. But it's really just think about what you're going to use for alignment. If you're going to digitize in some X's or lines that you're going to use for alignment points, if you're going to use features on things that sew out, things like that. All right. Hopefully that helps. And I didn't just confuse anyone. Like I said, I do it a lot, so hopefully that made sense. How do you solve the issue of bobbin thread in certain parts of a fill shape showing on top thread not rolling back on all edges of the shape? I would look at your bobbin tension. Basically, look at the balance of your tensions, right? You would want to go through and make sure your bobbin tension is set right and that your active feed's not too high. So if your bobbin's loose, the bobbin's going to come up. All right, so if your bobbin's too loose, the bobbin is going to come to the top of the design. If your top thread is too tight, it's possible that that top thread is, again, going to pull the bobbin up. All right, so check your bobbin thread. Make sure the tension on that is appropriate for your machine. It does vary based on machine, depending on what model is. So look for what your model is. Make sure your bobbin is set appropriately. And then your top thread, it might be too tight. So what that means is your active feed might be too low, so you might need to increase it a little bit. Okay. How do you make a design for lace? So I did that a while back. When did I do that? Let's go see. Because I had an example, and I don't remember what that example was, but let me go try to find it. Dropbox. Elko. That one. Lace. Freestanding lace. Oh. See what that was. Oh yeah, I remember that one. Okay. That one's cute. All right, so freestanding lace is really a matter of making, well, one, if you've never done it, it's a lot of fun. You're going to go use a wash away stabilizer of some sort when you actually go to sew it. So there's a cut and wash, which is great. I think the generic name for that is Vilene. I love that stuff. It's fibrous. It's not clear like the Badge Master. It's not, or Solvay. It's not a stretchy material. It's more fibrous. So it behaves, in my opinion, more like a cutaway, which is personally what I like to sew on. So I always use that, the cut and wash type product. So then the other thing you got to think about is when you're doing lace, all the material is going to be dissolved away. So you've got to make sure everything's connected. If it's not connected, it's just going to fall apart. When you wash it out, you're going to end up with thread just coming apart. So you just got to think through your project. So come up with whatever you're wanting to do and then work your way through the design. So in this one, did a complex fill with an open weave because I want it to look lacy, right? So that's just a complex fill, density of 40. The underlay is the same 40 with an angle of 90. That gives you this crosshatch pattern. There is the option, the properties over here, to do a trapunto, and I'll undo that so you can see. So see how that's kind of messy? What a trapunto does is it forces all the stitches to go to the edge so that you get a nice clean crosshatch. Okay, so after that, then it's all this detail work, right? So first off, remember, it's all got to connect. I'm going to have these satin stitches going across, but if I just started sewing satin stitches here, some of the stitches are just going to fall through in these gaps. So you want to go through and do a nice running type thing, running stitches, so that when you go back over them, it's already connected and tied into that white stuff that you did first, right? So this is just a running stitch, running around, tracing my shape, and then starting where the last one is, it goes over that. So we do a single line. Lace, again, is another tip for that, is you don't want your densities too tight, all right? These are narrow little columns, and you don't want a ton of thread in there. It's unnecessary. It looks really nice even at higher densities. So we do a single line. Then this guy is a walk. So this one started there, it ended there. We're going to walk around, and then we're going to do this guy. So now here's the puzzle aspect of digitizing. How do we get all of this together in the order we want? So we did all this tracing stuff. We ended here, did my single line. We walk around, do another single line down. And again, notice the properties on that guy, 5.5. All right, so it ends down here. Again, we're going to do another single line to walk down so that we can come across here. Walk down. This one I forgot to do earlier, so we need to connect the dots. So we did a walk down and then a single line back. Okay. And then again, another walk. So it's really puzzling your way around the design so that you're starting and stopping where you want. So we went over here to come around before doing this. Why? Because I need to end with that little dangly thing here. These features I have to end with last. So I need to do that heart, do all this, come around, so then I can sew up to create the little dangly thing and have it all connected. So depending on what you're working on, the key to doing lace is going to be making sure that you have underlay, that you're using those running stitches, even if you're using wider columns, edge walks and zigzags, to make sure you're tying everything together so that when your column goes across, it doesn't just fall apart. Okay, does that help at all, Viola? Hopefully it does. When was this? Let's see. Open file location. So that was May 11th. I talked about it too. Oh, it looks like on that same day, wow, this is very similar. That same day I did an example of multiple hoopings, and this was a huge project. It was welcome, like a banner. Karen's asking, I want to lessen the density on a purchase design. I converted it to wireframe, then selected the objects and tried to change it. It didn't work. Is there a better way? So when you convert to wireframe, you often lose a lot of the detail of the design. So some tricks of working with expanded files. So if I go open a design, legacy, this one's expanded. So I'm going to open that one. Okay. So some tricks to working with density on these. So I can select whatever it is, rather than converting it, I can select the element I want to modify, right click on it and go to scale. Down here, well, this whole screen are things you can do with it, right? So if I want to add pull compensation, I can do that here. This is for columns and this is for the fill. So it's two separate things. Down here is where I can adjust the density. So if I want less or more, I can adjust that percentage, and you can do that. When you convert things to wireframe, it's my suggestion to only convert the things you actually want. Don't do the whole design, because it's often you lose resolution, because as it's trying to decide where that shape is to form a wireframe, it does its best, but sometimes it does all these jagged lines because that's where the stitches are, when in reality the shape you want is a nice curve. Okay, so rather than having to play cleanup a lot, if you just select the element you want to modify, sometimes it's, you can convert and just deal with that one little thing and then move along. But I would just suggest going into the scale mode and using these. It works pretty well. All right, Karen, did that help? All right, what other questions do we have? Okay, so we did multiple hoopings. We talked about those. All right, well, those were all the questions I had sent in ahead of time. Let me scan through, make sure I didn't miss any. Talked about that. We talked about lace. Talked about density on purchase designs. That's cool. All right. So I will hang on for a little bit in case anyone has any questions they want to type in real quick. But otherwise, we're going to call it a day. Next week, I'm aiming for Friday to see what questions you might have. I know it's that time of year. We're getting into holiday season, so hopefully everyone's starting to think about those, all that work, all the last minutes. Can you put 100 names on 50 on 100 stockings? And by the way, can I have it tomorrow? So start getting yourself in the mindset for that. What else? Don't forget the primer stitch for that. It's really helpful if you're doing like, for, things where you've got nap or texture on fabrics that are going to go eat your design. So that can be really beneficial. But short of that, I guess we will call it a day. I'm just thankful soccer season is done for the season. So I have 3 children in sports and it's exhausting. So 1 of 3 is done. So now I'm down to 2 sports until the spring. So, that's cool. All right, y'all. Have a fantastic weekend. I will talk to you next week. Have fun sewing. Bye, everyone.